High in the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, beyond the reach of empires, lies a vision of the end unlike anything you've ever heard. In monasteries carved into mountain rock, in scrolls inked with the prayers of weeping monks, in a language the West forgot to remember, there lives an apocalypse that doesn't burn the world to ash, but brings it back to light. This is not the Book of Revelation you were taught. There are no beasts wearing crowns, no blood-soaked rider on a white horse, no thunderous wrath from a warrior god. Instead, angels weep, souls walk through bridges of light, and Christ doesn't return with a sword in his mouth, but as a radiant shepherd, guiding his flock not with violence, but with wisdom. This is the Ethiopian apocalypse, and it may be the oldest surviving vision of the end ever recorded. So why haven't you heard of it? Because it was buried, not by time, but by Rome, by empire, by a version of Christianity that needed fear more than faith, and vengeance more than mercy. But today, we're unearthing it. And if you stay with me till the final section, I'll show you something that most Western Christians have never seen, evidence that Ethiopia's apocalypse may be closer to what the earliest followers of Jesus actually believed, before politics rewrote prophecy. So I want you to stay with us, not just watch it, experience it, because what you're about to hear might just shift your view of the end forever. So drop a comment right now and finish this sentence. What if the end? Give this video a like if you believe history has more than one voice, and subscribe because we're only just beginning to uncover what the church tried to forget.
Most people think there's only one book of Revelation, the one with dragons rising from the sea, with blood moons and trumpets of wrath, with beasts crowned in gold, harlots dressed in purple, and a final battle that splits heaven and earth in two. That version, the one we all know, it comes from a man named John of Patmos, and it's the final book in the Western Bible. But it wasn't always the only ending. In fact, in the earliest centuries of Christianity, there were many. Different communities, some in Syria, others in Egypt, and especially in the highlands of Ethiopia, held on to other visions of the end. One of the most mysterious is called the Apocalypse of Peter. It was once revered across the Christian East. The early Alexandrian church cherished it, and in Ethiopia, it was canonized, preserved, copied by hand, passed down by monks, and read aloud beneath stone-carved crosses as part of Holy Scripture. While Rome would eventually reject it, Ethiopia enshrined it. And the difference is stunning, because this apocalypse doesn't focus on plagues or punishments or empire falling. It doesn't glorify war or hail a sword-wielding Messiah. It tells a different story, a more human one. In one unforgettable passage, sinners are shown weeping under a rain of fire, but not alone. Above them, angels weep too. Yes, angels, not as judges, but as witnesses, not as executioners, but as grievers. This is an apocalypse where heaven does not celebrate destruction, heaven mourns it. And this isn't a one-off moment. Throughout the Ethiopian texts, Christ appears not as a warrior king, but as a radiant shepherd. He walks beside the lost. He doesn't strike them down, he leads them home. Imagine that for a second. The end of the world, not as annihilation, but as healing. Not a scream, but a sigh. And what does that say about the God behind it? It says that maybe judgment isn't about vengeance, but restoration. Maybe wrath isn't the final word. Maybe mercy is. This is the heart of Ethiopia's apocalypse. And it couldn't be more different from the version that came to dominate the Western world. You see, in the West, revelation was forged in a time of persecution. Christians under Roman rule longed for justice. Many wanted vengeance. So when John's vision spoke of beasts and destruction and a warrior Christ bringing fire, it struck a powerful chord. It gave hope through conquest. But Ethiopia didn't need a conqueror. It needed a healer. Separated from the empire, untouched by Rome's theological wars, Ethiopia had space to remember something the West was starting to forget: that the divine is not only mighty, it is also tender. That punishment may purify, but love restores. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the earliest Christians believed too, before the politics of empire shaped the pages of prophecy. So here's the quiet lesson this part of the story whispers to us. Not all revelations roar. Some simply weep. And it's in that weeping, those tears from heaven over a broken creation, that we begin to glimpse the heart of a God who still hopes, even for the lost. But what if this wasn't just theological poetry? What if the reason Ethiopia preserved this version goes deeper? In the next section, we'll uncover why early Christianity didn't speak with one voice, and how the empire silenced dozens of other apocalypses you've probably never heard of.
Long before Christianity wore robes of gold and spoke from thrones of marble, long before it had creeds written by councils or cathedrals echoing in Latin, it was a scattered fire, a quiet whisper spreading through deserts, synagogues, fishing villages, and mountain-top monasteries. And in those early days, Christians didn't agree on everything, especially not on how the world would end. Because before the Roman Empire got involved, before emperors started baptizing armies and burning heretics, the early church was not one church, it was many. And each had its own vision of the end. In fact, what we now call the Book of Revelation was just one voice in a crowded room. There were dozens of apocalypses circulating in the first few centuries. The apocalypse of Thomas, the shepherd of Hermas, the apocalypse of Paul, even the ascension of Isaiah, all carried powerful visions of judgment, transformation, and hope. And yes, many of them were deeply loved by Christian communities across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia Minor. The apocalypse of Peter, which we explored earlier, was one of the most cherished. Early church leaders like Clement of Alexandria and Methodius of Olympus quoted it with reverence. Some early Bibles even included it before Revelation of John ever became official. But then came the empire. When Constantine converted to Christianity in the 4th century, something changed. Faith met power, and power doesn't like too many voices. The Roman Church, eager to unite doctrine under a single imperial vision, began the slow process of standardizing Scripture. It gathered councils, voted on books, and little by little, voices were silenced. By the time of the Council of Carthage in 397 CE, the decision was made. Only one apocalypse would remain, Revelation of John. The others? Gone, buried, labeled apocryphal, heretical, dangerous. But not in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was never conquered by Rome. Its church, rooted in the traditions of the East, developed far from the theological politics of Byzantium. And so, while the Western church trimmed and tidied its canon, Ethiopia preserved the wild garden. It held on to not just the apocalypse of Peter, but also the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and countless prayers, visions, and prophecies that never made it past Rome's gates. This independence wasn't just geographical, it was spiritual. While Roman Christianity began tying itself to empire, Ethiopia clung to the mystical. Where one sought uniformity, the other embraced mystery. And that perhaps is the great lesson of this era. Christianity didn't begin with one voice. It began as a chorus. Bart D. Ehrman. So what does this mean for us now? It means that what we call the Bible today wasn't just handed down from heaven, it was shaped, edited, selected, and sometimes silenced. But Ethiopia? Ethiopia remembers. And in doing so, it offers us a rare gift, a glimpse into a Christianity that might have been, and that, in small corners of the world, still is. So now we've seen how the Western Church narrowed the voices of revelation down to one, while Ethiopia held the door open for many. But that raises a deeper question. What exactly did Ethiopia keep? What is this Ethiopian vision of the end of days? In the next part, we'll step fully into their world to see how their apocalypse doesn't rage with fire and beasts, but glows with light, sorrow, and something most visions forget: hope.
So what exactly does Ethiopia's apocalypse reveal? If the Western revelation ends in fury, Ethiopia's vision begins in sorrow and ends in something far more radical: compassion. In most apocalyptic stories, fire is the final word. It consumes, it punishes, it marks the border between the saved and the damned. But in the Ethiopian tradition, fire doesn't simply destroy, it purifies. Imagine a vision where sinners are not hurled into eternal torment, but instead walk through flames that refine the soul. Not to burn it forever, but to burn away what is broken. In one ancient passage preserved in Gez, the fire falls from heaven, and the angels don't cheer. They weep. They cry for humanity, not because it is judged, but because it ever had to be. This is not wrath. This is sorrow. It's judgment, yes, but not as violence. It's judgment as lament, as the pain of heaven watching a creation lose its way. And what of Christ? He does not ride a war horse or swing a sword. He doesn't bear fire in his eyes or blood on his robe. Instead, he appears as a radiant shepherd, a guide, a light bearer, someone who walks with the soul through its reckoning, not against it. This Christ doesn't condemn from afar. He enters the valley of judgment beside you, not because he has to, but because love never leaves. This view of the end times isn't just softer, it's deeper. It reminds us that the point of divine justice isn't to separate the worthy from the worthless. It's to heal the wound that runs through all of us. And this healing isn't just personal, it's cosmic. The Ethiopian texts speak of the world itself being restored, of heaven and earth mending their bond, of a time not when the righteous escape a burning world, but when all things are made whole again. It echoes something ancient, something older than the Council of Rome or the scrolls of Patmos. It echoes the Book of Enoch, long held sacred in Ethiopia, a text where fallen angels grieve their rebellion, and where divine judgment is not just punishment, but purification for the entire cosmos. Even the damned, in some Ethiopian interpretations, are not forever cast aside, but instead pass through cycles of correction, returning eventually to the light. It's a vision that dares to suggest that God's mercy outlasts his own judgment. And that changes everything, because if we take this vision seriously, then the end of the world is not about who gets left behind. It's about who gets brought home. It teaches us this: fire does not only destroy,
sometimes it heals. Judgment does not always condemn, sometimes it cries. And that quiet, sacred difference might just be the most profound theological shift we'll ever encounter. But it also raises a powerful question. Why didn't the West embrace this vision? Why did Rome choose fear over healing? Why was the image of a sword mightier than the light of a shepherd? To answer that, we have to leave theology for a moment and step into history. Because the difference between these two revelations has as much to do with politics as it does with prophecy. And in the next part, we'll journey into the heart of that divide, into the stone churches of Lalibela and the burning halls of empire, to see why Ethiopia's apocalypse survived, while the rest were left behind.
Tucked high in the Ethiopian highlands, where the clouds kiss stone and the earth holds its breath, there stands a city carved, not built. Lalibela. It's not just a place, it's a prayer frozen in rock. 12 churches, chiseled down into solid volcanic stone, not stacked upward, but dug into the earth, as if trying to touch something deeper than the sky. And in those churches, some of them over 900 years old, the liturgy still echoes in Ge'ez, the sacred language of Ethiopia. But what makes Lalibela truly sacred is not just the architecture, it's what it protects. Because while empires rose and fell, while crusades raged and inquisitions burned books, Lalibela endured. It became a fortress of memory, guarding ancient scrolls, mystical writings, and a version of Christianity the West never truly understood. Within its walls, monks preserved the Apocalypse of Peter, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and dozens of other texts that were long ago cast out by the Roman Church. But Ethiopia didn't just preserve these writings by accident. It did so because of something deeper, a spiritual identity rooted not in empire, but in lineage. You see, according to Ethiopian tradition, when the Queen of Sheba visited King Solomon in Jerusalem, she didn't just bring gold and questions. She brought back something far greater, a child, Menelik. And when Menelik grew older, he returned to Jerusalem, and according to the Kebra Nagast, he brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia. To this day, many Ethiopians believe the Ark rests in Aksum, watched over by priests who have devoted their entire lives to guarding it. This belief gave Ethiopia something no other Christian kingdom had: a direct link to the God of Abraham, a claim of divine inheritance, a sense of chosenness. And because of that, they didn't need Rome's approval. They didn't need Constantinople's authority. They had their own covenant, their own priesthood, their own canon. So while the Western Church standardized, simplified, and silenced, Ethiopia remembered. It remembered a time when Christianity was wild and diverse, when visions were personal, not political, when mysticism mattered more than empire. And it held on to that memory in places like Lalibela, where scripture wasn't debated in marble halls, but whispered in mountain caves. This is why Ethiopia still reads texts like the Book of Enoch, a book that speaks of watchers, heavenly secrets, and cosmic judgment that purifies rather than condemns. This is why their apocalypse shows angels weeping, not armies conquering. Because Ethiopia's Christianity was never shaped by empire. It was shaped by exile, by mystery, by the silence between the stars. So when we open Ethiopia's sacred books, we're not reading some strange alternative version of Christianity. We're reading what Christianity might have looked like if it had never been politicized, if it had remained pure. And that purity, that flame preserved in silence and stone, is more than just history. It's a gift, a chance to remember what we once knew. But while Ethiopia remembered, the West forgot.
And that forgetting didn't just erase books. It changed the soul of Christianity itself. In the final part of this journey, we'll explore what the West lost when it buried Ethiopia's apocalypse, and how recovering it might just change the way we see everything. Not just how the world ends, but how it heals.
So what exactly did the West lose when it turned its back on Ethiopia's apocalypse? It lost more than just a book. It lost a way of seeing the world. You see, when the Roman Church buried the apocalypse of Peter, when it silenced the Book of Enoch, when it drew a hard line around what was true and what was heresy, it didn't just shape theology. It shaped emotion. It shaped expectation. It shaped fear. Western Christianity, especially in its apocalyptic imagination, became obsessed with judgment as finality, eternal torment, fire that punishes, not purifies, a Messiah who returns with wrath in his eyes and a sword in his mouth. And that vision, over centuries, found its way into everything. Into sermons, into stained glass, into the nightmares of children and the battle cries of nations. It created what many now call rapture theology, a belief that the world is a sinking ship and only a chosen few will be pulled out before it burns. A belief that what matters most is escape. But Ethiopia tells a different story. Its apocalypse doesn't scream, "Run." It whispers, "Return." Return to balance. Return to the divine. Return to the harmony between heaven and earth. Because in Ethiopia's vision, salvation isn't about abandoning the world, it's about restoring it. It's not about separating the righteous from the wicked. It's about healing the breach in all of us. This shift from punishment to purification, from wrath to lament, might seem small, but it changes everything. Because it reveals a God who doesn't just win. He waits. He weeps. He walks beside. He hopes. And that's the vision we buried. We buried a Christianity where the apocalypse wasn't just an explosion, but an unveiling. The apocalypse is not the end, it's the unveiling. Ethiopian oral tradition. An unveiling of divine sorrow. An unveiling of the soul's deepest truth. And maybe, just maybe, an unveiling of the mercy we didn't know was always there. Today, many Christians in the West are beginning to rediscover these ancient paths. The Ethiopian texts are being translated, studied, and honored again, not because they replace the Bible, but because they remind us of the voices we left behind. Voices that speak of light instead of fire, of angels who mourn instead of punish, of judgment that comes not with swords, but with tears. It's not just theology, it's therapy for the soul. Because let's be honest, we live in an age of fear, of endings, of divisions too deep to cross. And for many, the Christian story has become one more source of dread. But Ethiopia kept another version alive. A version that says, yes, the world is broken. Yes, there is judgment. Yes, we must face what we've done. But it also says, no one is too far gone. No soul is beyond light. And even the fire might be a doorway home. So maybe it's time we listened. Not just to the loudest voices, but to the oldest ones. The voices carved into stone, sung in the highlands, preserved in the language of angels. Because what Ethiopia remembered might be exactly what the modern world has forgotten. That the end of the world doesn't have to be the end of hope.